Hello, this is my presentation over students with autism, and we will be discussing both their characteristics and the instructional needs that they have in the classroom. So first we'll talk about characteristics of students with autism. Students with autism, they are still children. They have their own interests, they have their own personalities, but there are things that children who have autism have in common that we as teachers, we need to be aware of so we know how to best um, accommodate their needs within the classroom. So first off, we'll talk about social relationships. People who have autism, they have a very difficult time with social relationships. They do not come easily to them because students with autism, they will generally avoid human interaction. Um, and because of that, or perhaps in addition to that, they don't quite have the same understanding of social interaction that that the rest of us do. They may not understand cues in the conversation or body language or tone, things like that. And so that makes having conversations very difficult for them, and it makes having conversations with them difficult as well. They tend to resist making eye contact, either when speaking or when listening to. And conversations are usually very one-sided when having conversations with people with autism. There's not that give and take. You may get very short answers, yes, no, shrug, and not much else. Next, leads into communication. You know, if it's difficult to have a conversation with a student who is autistic, what problems do they have with that communication? So a lot of children who have autism, they have that delayed language development. They didn't start speaking at 2 and 3 years old. It came much later to them. They didn't repeat words or babble or anything like that. So they acquired those language skills much later, and they may not be fully developed depending on what grade you're teaching. And of course, if you don't have all of the knowledge of the language, that's going to give that difficulty in conversation. And they tend to respond physically instead of verbally. So, if you tell them to do something, they may just get up and go do it. And it may feel like you're being ignored, but that's not necessarily the case. They just don't know how to respond. They don't have the words. They may be thinking of a response in their head, but the words that they need to say, the words that they want to say, they just are not there. They're not coming to them. And if this is a child that's very young, perhaps it's because of that delayed language development. They don't have the right words to say. And if it's a child who's older, the words may just be stuck inside and not be able to come out. So that makes communication very difficult for them. In terms of their interest, um, students who have autism, they can have interests in a wide variety of topics, but each individual child will not share the same interest in topics as everyone else. So each individual usually has a narrow range of topics. They may really enjoy talking about trains or about a certain point in history or an animal or something like that. And so if they're talking about their interest in topic, they may be able to talk on and on and on and tell you all sorts of interesting facts. And then when it comes to a topic that they have no interest in it, then it may just seem like they totally shut down, or they can't communicate about that. And that's very characteristic of people with autism. They are hyper focused. They just focus on that one thing, or they may just focus on that one task that they're doing at a time. And so it's very difficult to multitask. Um, it's difficult for a lot of people to multitask, but students with autism, they have that a, a particular difficulty with that. And that's something that we need to be aware of in the classroom. If there's a lot going on in the classroom, the autistic student may not be able to focus. And of course, this can affect their social relationships. If they're trying to have a conversation with someone who is sharing something that they have no interest in, well, they may totally tune out and walk away from the conversation. And they're not seeing it as being rude. It just doesn't interest them, and so they leave. And so that definitely affects social relationships, because it's hard to make friends that way. Um, and in terms of student stress, all of these characteristics make it very difficult for students with autism, in their daily lives, and especially in the classroom. They have a very low threshold for stress. If there's a lot of tension built up, they don't know how to regulate. They can't handle it. And so whenever that stress comes, they may lash out or, leave the situation, whatever the case may be. They don't know how to regulate the situation. Whenever they get anxious, they have a hard time dealing with anxiety. Any kind of change in routine. So um, if there's a change in the schedule, time-wise, or just any kind of routine, that can cause a lot of anxiety, because students who have autism, they do best in a well-structured daily routine. They know what to expect. They don't have that anxiety, because of that routine. So anytime there's a change up and their expectation is gone, that's going to cause anxiety, which is going to add to their stress. And so in response to this anxiety or any kind of stress that they're having, that's where we see some of that characteristic restricted and repetitive behaviors, abbreviated RRB. So those restricted repetitive behaviors, examples of those would include, the rocking back and forth, maybe doing a certain task repeatedly, just over and over and over again. And it's how these children are coping with the situation. It soothes them, and it's not bad per se, but sometimes those behaviors, they can be distracting, especially in a classroom full of other children. And so the big question is, when we have students in our classrooms who are autistic, how do we help them? We want them to thrive, we want them to do well, and we want them to be accepted by their classmates. We're not trying to change who they are. We're not trying to turn them into the other students who don't have autism. We just want them to be who they are, but be the best versions of who they are. And so as teachers, there are several things that we can do to help our autistic students. So first, you have to understand that if you have a child who has autism this year and you have a child who has autism next year, those two children will not be the same. They may have some of the same characteristics, but there is a huge diversity between those two children. Their interests may be different, their coping behaviors may be different, their communication and language skills may be different. So we have to understand that each child is different. And of course, we will do that with the rest of our class anyway. No two children are the same. And so we have to meet the needs of each child as they come. So each autistic student needs different supports. Each is going to have different challenges, and each is going to have different capabilities. So it's just not putting them all in the same box, but looking at them as individuals. And once we do that, then we can learn how to help respond to their behaviors. So anytime they go into their RRBs, we need to give them accommodations to help them cope with the situation. And they need to have access to those accommodations. Anytime we can provide structure that helps these students, if we can post our daily schedule on the wall where they can see it, that can be helpful. If they know what to expect, when to expect it, all of that kind of stuff, do things in a routine way. And it will help not only the children with autism, but it will help the rest of the class as well. So these accommodations, they're not only for children with autism, but they are things that are, you know, specific for children with autism, but they're helpful, beneficial for everyone else too. Along with that structure, having pictures for routines or pictures of what to expect, that's helpful for students with autism because a lot of times they will be visual learners. And if they're in a stressed or anxious state, then reading something or hearing something may not do a lot of good, but seeing a picture may help them to regulate and to be able to focus on the task at hand. Also, providing quiet time for autistic students. As noise levels in a classroom increase, or in the lunchroom, or PE, or recess, anytime there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of different areas of focus, and that causes a lot of stress for students. So having quiet time allows them to regulate, it allows them to process events, and it allows them to cope with the situation around them. And then finally we have, well, not finally, but next we have fostering social interactions. So trying to help these students communicate with their peers so they're not just in a world by themselves. We want them to be able to have friends and to navigate the world out there. So first and foremost, we need to observe. It's not a teacher's role to make sure that, Billy becomes friends with Andy. It's our job to observe and to, give assistance as it's needed. So if we see behaviors that are occurring that need to be corrected, we correct those. If we, if we can see that someone's trying to have a conversation and maybe struggling and getting frustrated, well, then we can step in and help with that conversation. But observation is key. And some of those social skills that we need to help our autistic students learn how to do, I have up on this slide. So that would be things like taking turns, learning how to wait, learning how to be patient, learning how to stop once they've started a task, learning how to negotiate, having that back and forth, learning how to be quiet when they're supposed to be quiet, and learning how to be flexible. And these are skills that all children must learn how to do. They don't occur, or they don't come to any child totally naturally and completely easy. But for students with autism, it is especially difficult because they are not able to regulate in quite the same way. So if we can teach these students how to do these things um, that will help them with their social interactions. And lastly, um, we need to be able to communicate with these students. So help them with their speech, help them through visuals, help them through sign language, whatever method of communication they are comfortable with, that is going to be our inroad with them to help them succeed. And in doing this, we may be needing to consult parents or special education teachers, especially depending on the student's age and their capabilities. Young children, parents may have a system of communication at home that if we implement in the classroom, it can make things very easy during the year. Um, so always important to keep up communication with parents um, and communication all around to help our autistic students be the best that they can be. Thank you.